Hi guys, so this is part one of a two-part series. I'm going to explain why gods are like us, and then in part two, the part one I'm going to explain how gods are like us, and then in part two I'm going to explain why gods are like us. So there is something we call anthropomorphism. Okay, anthropomorphism is the attribution of human qualities, human thoughts, human characteristics, and human behavior to non-human entities like gods. Okay. And it basically means describing or imagining gods or non-human entities in human terms and describing them in human terms. If you look at Hindu gods like Vishnu, Rama, Krishna, and so on, they're represented as human beings. They have a head, they have legs, they have hands, they speak, they get angry, and so on and so forth. If you look at even Yoruba gods, they have the same. And even if you look at African indigenous religions, the gods were represented as human beings. We call them figurines, okay? Gods, fertility gods, and so on and so forth. Even in Greek mythology, Roman mythology, all those gods, Zeus, including the Egyptians. If you look at the Egyptian hieroglyphics, Osiris and the rest are represented as human beings. I want to look at the biblical, the Abrahamic God, how we represent him as a human being, okay? The first thing, of course, we start in the Lord's Prayer, our Father who art in heaven. We call him a father, he's not a mother. He is in heaven. Why is he in heaven? He needs a dwelling place. So we assume that because human beings, we live in houses, we need protection from the elements. We also assume that also God needs a dwelling place, okay? That is an anthropomorphism. God needs a son, okay? That's an anthropomorphism. He's an immortal person. He doesn't need to reproduce. God also needs a human being, that's a virgin, to give birth to his son, an anthropomorphism. God also needs this woman to be a virgin. Men only value virginity because that's the only way to guarantee paternity. God is an omniscient being. He can guarantee paternity even if his son is born by a human being who is not a virgin, or a woman who is not a virgin. In Leviticus 1:9, you are told that God loves the aroma of roast meat. Okay? That's a very serious anthropomorphism. And it also speaks to the culture of the people who invented this particular God. God is also given sacrifice to please and placate him. Okay? Why would God need to be pleased if he's given food? Why would you need to bribe him, in quotes, with food and sacrifices? If you look at from evolutionary psychology, including the book by David Bass, it's called Evolution of Desire. He says that acts of submission like sacrifice. You see, in the Bible, we have things like fasting, offering sacrifices, kneeling, bowing, and so on. Those are acts of submission. The reason we engage in acts of submission among primates or among intelligent beings is to avoid costly conflict. Because there are only two ways. Like if you have two alpha males meeting, you either fight and whoever wins becomes the dominant, or you submit or sacrifice. When you engage in an act of sacrifice, you avoid a costly conflict. Okay? So people transferred the idea that alpha males require acts of submission to God. And God, there's a book by Hector Garcia called The Alpha God that talks about how God, the Abrahamic God, is an alpha God. We also assume that because we treat him as an alpha, he will also require a sacrifice. And we are giving him food. Okay? 2 Kings 3:2-7. We have the story of where the king of Moab sacrifices his son to appease a god during a military crisis. Okay? So human sacrifice used to be done in the old religions, the Aztec religions, and even the story of Abraham and Isaac, where Abraham is told to sacrifice his son Isaac. Of course, later on, Aram is provided and Abraham doesn't sacrifice Isaac. Biblical scholars treat that as a polemic against human sacrifice that was being practiced by other Canaanite religions where the Jewish religion is sprung from. Okay? So Hector Garcia says that sacrifice normally is an indication of submission to the alpha and commitment to the alpha. So the alpha allows you then to become a part of his tribe. Then he can provide you with protection and provisioning. That was the purpose of sacrifice. But you see, we say nowadays that God is omnipotent. He has everything he needs. Why would we need to give him food? Why will we need to give him money? Okay, it doesn't make any sense. That's also an anthropomorphism. Okay, and then we have the story of in Numbers 28:2. God calls sacrifices my food, my offerings. Okay, it's like he wants to take possession of what is given. That's also an anthropomorphism. God already has everything. If he's already omnipotent, why does he need to have more? Okay, it doesn't make sense. And then we also have the story of in Exodus, we are told Moses, well, every time Moses needed to see God, he went up to the mountain. Okay, so God dwelt at the top of the mountain. Later on, of course, he becomes a universal God and he becomes even transcendent. Nowadays, we say God is not even part of the universe. People say God is transcendent. He's not part of time. He's unchanging and so on. So that was an anthropomorphism. In Revelation, we are told about the book of life, where God keeps a record of the good people and the bad people. Why does God need a book? Okay, the reason we keep records is because we can forget. Why does God need to keep a record of people who have done good and bad? That's also an anthropomorphism, and it doesn't make sense considering he's omniscient and he knows everything. He doesn't need a record. Another anthropomorphism is in Proverbs 15:3, which says that the eyes of the Lord are everywhere, keeping watch of the wicked and the good. Why does God need eyes? He doesn't even need to be able to look everywhere to the good and the bad people. That's an anthropomorphism. In Nahum 1 chapter 2, we are told that he's a jealous God and he's an avenging God. Jealousy is a human emotion. Even avenging, the act of vengeance is some human compulsion, okay, to even the odds or to correct the wrongs. In Genesis 3:8, we are told that God is walking in the Garden of Eden. For you to walk, you need feet. So again, this is an anthropomorphism. In Genesis 2 chapter 2, we are told God rested after his act of creation on the seventh day. So he was like he was tired. Why would God get tired? Why would he need to rest? That's an anthropomorphism. We are also told that God created man using clay, okay, like a potter. So even God in Genesis is portrayed as what we call a craftsman instead of being a creator. He uses the existing material to create man. And then he also told he breathes the breath of life into that clay after fashioning it into man. Those are again anthropomorphisms. Okay? In Psalms 103:13, you're told that God acts as a father, and as a father, he has compassion for his children. So human emotions like compassion, again, we are attributing them to God. If you look at 1 Samuel 15:11, he regrets setting up Saul as a king of Israel. So this God makes mistakes, he gets mad, he lacks foresight, because you cannot, if you have foresight, there's no way you can make mistakes. But you see that in Samuel, he makes mistakes, he regrets. Even later on, he's a God who decided to flood the whole earth, kill all the bad people so that he can start afresh. These are anthropomorphisms. So I think at this point it should be very clear to anyone who has gone through this video that the God of the Bible, the Abrahamic God, is created in the image of man. In the next segment, we're going to look at why we did that. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one.